How to go from idea to build to launch. So I've been having a lot of conversations recently with businesses of all different shapes and sizes, ranging from startups to medium businesses to large enterprises, all kind of asking me the same question, which is we've got this idea and we want to take it to launch and we want to then evolve it. But obviously, like everybody, they're concerned about losing money or losing their investment, and they want to know how can they give themselves the best chance of getting an ROI from what it is that they're going to build. So what I'm going to do is walk through a very high level and sort of fundamentally quite basic approach to how to go from idea to launch to scale. And so if you're an experienced digital product owner, this video is probably not for you. But if you're starting out on your journey, you're either in a startup or a mid-tier business, and digital product builds is not necessarily something which you do day to day, or you've built something and you've been burnt in the past. So you've had you've gone to build an app for your business, or you've gone to build something in AI, or you tried to build a platform or a service, and actually you've been massively burnt by doing that because it hasn't delivered the results you hoped. I'm going to show a couple of processes to hopefully give you some guidance on how to stop avoiding making those mistakes and to build something that actually generates real ROI through the process. So there's going to be two things I'm going to show. One, which is the human-centric design process, which is kind of let's say the gold standard in how to approach digital product development. Which has been around for a long time, but the mindset is still very, very relevant. And then what I'm going to do is to show a second process, which is how that process has evolved now that we have AI tooling and we've moved on, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, to evolve that process. So what I'm going to start with is what we call the double diamond approach. And this is kind of the best way to actually ensure that what you're building is human-centric in that human-centric design approach. And what we mean by human-centric is very simple. The human is at the center of what we're building. So if I get my 2 diamonds up here, actually leave some space over here. Okay, so here what we've got is two diamonds. On the left-hand side here, you've basically got your idea. You've sat in the pub, you've written it on the back of a fag packet, and now you've been like, right, I've had my eureka moment, now what do I go and do? So what we've got throughout this double diamond process is 2 phases. One, which is discover, and one, which is concept. And what we want to do in both of these phases is start narrow and then go very broad. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. You've got your idea. Now what you want to do is go and experiment with that. You want to go and build data. You want to go and build evidence about how to build out that idea so that it's actually something that people want. It's also something that will make money for the business, and it's also something that's technically feasible. And actually, before I go any further, one thing I should say is what you want through this process is what we call a cross-functional team helping you throughout that process, whether it's internal or with an external partner. So for example, what could be involved at this point could be researchers, it could be strategists, could be solution architects, it could be business analysts. Depending on how deep you want to go, then you're going to have different resources. But I'll focus on effectively actually what it is that they're going to be doing. So what we want to do here is we want to take the idea and we want to generate a lot of qualitative and quantitative data that basically can build the evidence and the data that can actually drive the decision making into what this product is actually going to become. What a lot of people do, they have their idea, let's go and build it, see what happens. That's happening more and more because obviously we've had the advent of low code and no code, and the idea is, well, it's so cheap, let's just get it out and then evolve it. There is a place for that, for sure, but it really depends on the complexity and the ambitions of that product. And also it's got to be done strategically, but that's a conversation for another day. So we've got the idea, and effectively what we want to do, like I said, is go and build that evidence and that data. So how we do that is to generate that qualitative and quantitative data. Effectively, the simple way is we want to talk to the user, e.g. that user-centered design, And we also want to go and talk to the business, and we want to look at the tech component of what we're going to do. So at this point, to generate that kind of user-centric data, we want to do, and it depends on how complex or simple you want to keep your process and how in-depth that you want to go. But to keep it really simple, at this stage, what you want to be doing is engaging with users. You want to be using them as your data point. So for example, you want to do user interviews. You want to question around them. If you were to use the service, what do you want from it? What you want to do is to build different personas so that you can actually build an ICP around who you want to build that product around. You also want to do things like competitor benchmarking, looking at other kind of competition in the market of, let's say, similar or relatively similar types of services, if there are any. So there's lots and lots of different things that we can do at this point. Different canvases, different workshops, different frameworks, different models. I won't go into too much depth, but ultimately what you want to do is you want to get to this broad part of the diamond, and you want to have a huge amount of data that then you can then test and learn from and then refine over time. So what should happen throughout this process, through user testing and through iterating and evolving, and then again testing each step of the way, 4, 5, 6 iterations throughout that testing process, what you should have here is basically a validated concept or a validated idea. Ultimately, this is what we're going to build. We know why we're going to build it. And this is what the service needs to do. And actually, almost at this point, you could even have a pretty well-defined scope of what it is that the product is going to build. So then you want to take that validated scope and you want to move into the concepting phase. And again, the reason it's a double diamond is we want to take that same approach again. So we want to start quite narrow. So we've got the validated concept, and then we want to go and have some fun with it and go very broad. So what this means is you want to start building out huge amounts of different designs, different user journeys, different user flows, and you want to start kind of being quite experimental. So what you've done is you've started to build out lots of different designs. Now what we want to start to do is to narrow down that kind of user journey process. You want to start having different designs that actually are going to start to kind of manifest in the actual thing that you build. So again, through here, you have lots of iterations of user testing. So you start to actually analyze and look at different behavior patterns, how people are using it. So for example, if it's an app, you can actually track how people are using it, and you can get very, very scientific and data-driven on how do we actually get people to do what we want to do as quickly as possible. That's really what it's all about. But the idea also is that you want to be thinking about it from an MVP process. So it's all well and good having a scope, but also what you want to do is to work out, okay, what is that initial thing that we're going to launch with? Because ultimately, if you launch everything at once and you launch this big thing and actually it doesn't work, then ultimately everything has failed. If you launch an MVP or a minimum viable product, then actually what ends up happening is you can use data very quickly to then iterate and evolve the product without kind of huge amounts of investment and huge amounts of damage done to the service or the product. So by this point, effectively the outcome should be your final designs and a finally designed MVP. So this is effectively what is going to be built. So then, in terms of what the next step on the process is you then hand over these designs to your development team or to the development team. And effectively how this process, I haven't left myself much space, but how this should look is really simple. So it's really the agile development process. So you build, you test, you learn in an ongoing cycle, effectively. Now, this is the agile development cycle. You typically want to work in 3 weekly sprints so that you can then still check in with progress. So for example, if you're the CEO of a business, every 3 weeks you're going to have effectively a new version of that build to then test and see how you feel about progress. It also gives you that window to change your mind if needed. So effectively then what should happen is you go through this iteration aligned to the scope, then you build out the scope, and then what happens is you then are ready for launch. So this is the rough process to get you to launch. Then what happens, I haven't left any space on the board, is you then want to move into what we call scale or evolution. And this is quite simple. So again, that circle before is exactly the same, but the way that we look at it is two circles. So the big circle is the Agile development process, which is now ongoing, which is build, testing, and learning. But also what we're doing in this smaller circle is we're adopting an ongoing continuous process, the double diamond approach that we looked at before. So you've got constant data funneling in based on what people are doing with the live product. That data is then funneling into this bigger circle. So effectively, everything we're doing is data driven. We're not guessing at all. And what I would suggest is having a retained team, for example, that could be made up of designers, strategists, front-end development, back-end development, full-stack developers, however you prefer to work, testers, QA, etc. And certainly for us with bigger scale projects, we still see that actually breaking down those roles makes sense. But then this is basically how it should look every sprint. So you've got your retained team, they're working in this methodology, and then effectively you're releasing new iterations of that product on an ongoing basis. And also what this means, if you've still got your cross-functional team, you've still got kind of your core retained team, then because the data is constantly going into the development cycle, what should happen is the strategists, the designers, the developers should all be completely in sync with each other, making sure that what is being designed is then also appropriate to, let's say, the logic on the back end of the process. So you're not designing things in isolation, which is something that we see quite frequently. So now I'm going to talk about how this process has evolved. And excuse me for this scribble down here, but it was something my son did when he was quite young and I haven't had the heart to get rid of it. So yeah, you just have to put up with it. So now I'm going to talk about how, certainly at NuForm, we've adapted this process, but I think something that we're seeing more and more, which is really good if you are looking to build something from new, because ultimately the good news is it's faster, it's cheaper, but it's still human-centric and you still get all of that data that you need. So ultimately, the principle is the same. You still are approaching that same human-centric design process, but you're just approaching it in a much faster, much more iterative, rapid way of working. So the way that we look at it is that you have two tracks, one which is starting slightly after the first. On the top track, you've got effectively very, very similar to what you had before. So you kind of have the data, you have the design, e.g. discovering concept, and then effectively what happens is once you've gone through this design process here, that then funnels down into this second track, which is actually your development track. So you're constantly iterating here, excuse my drawing again, constantly going in an ongoing circle, but because you're using AI tooling, and you can design and you can get data and you can process data so much quicker, the whole process is just accelerated tenfold. So this constant evolution of data is then constantly going into this backlog. And when you start a project, what you want your kind of tech guys to be doing at the very beginning is building the real foundations of the product so they can get started even whilst it's iterating on the design and kind of usability side. So here what will be happening is things like the database is being built, the kind of back-end components are being built, and then as the front end matures, then, or the designs mature, then you can start to then funnel into the product as it naturally evolves. So what it means is you're being very efficient because you're not going discover, concept, then build, then evolve. Actually, what's happening from the very beginning is you're designing, you're concepting, you've got the data, but actually that is funneling in much, much quicker in a kind of continuous model as opposed to how it was before, which is what we kind of call like a Agile approach, which is kind of like a combination between waterfall and agile. And for those who haven't done this before, those are basically project management or governance models that structure the product engagement. So hopefully I'm keeping this at the right level for people who haven't done this before. I'm keeping it simple enough. But effectively what this should mean is, on the double diamond approach that I walk through, that could take anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get to an MVP, sort of, 2 to 3 months on the upfront double diamond sort of discovery and concepting phase. And then you move into that build and you typically get to an MVP launch by 6 to 9 months. The issue with that is, by that point, the service or product could be out of date or irrelevant, or the market's moved on. Whereas with this, what we aim to do with our customers is get them to an MVP within something like 4 to 6 weeks. You still need to kind of go through that process of collating data, qualitative and quantitative. But the difference is because you can iterate so fast and you can develop the platform so fast, you can learn on the fly as you go through that process. So you can do a lot more at once effectively. And obviously the same applies to the development track as well. As tooling improves, as development processes get so much quicker because AI is supporting so much of the way, then, and obviously testing as well, then obviously you can see why this creates so much more efficiency. And then again, you move into that, once that MVP is launched, you just move into a continuation of that cycle, which is build, test and learn as you go through. And obviously there's a lot more detail to that in terms of how you manage that development cycle to be data-driven and evidence-driven. Everyone has a slightly different level of maturity in their product approach. But anyway, hopefully this gives a good idea of the two different types of approaches, how it's evolved, and the kind of core concepts of how to go from idea to launch to scale. And just to be clear, this whole process, what we aim to do with our customers is go from idea to launch to scale in 4 to 6 weeks, and for an MVP at about 45K initial investment. And then obviously you move into a retained team, which could start at something like, we would recommend a minimum of say 15K a month. And then that can go up to, no matter how, as big as you want, depending on the demand and the scale that you want to get to. So hopefully that's all clear. This is my first sort of whiteboarding video. Please do give me some feedback, but hopefully it's been useful.